Take a good look at the skyline of Seoul. From the outside, it looks like the ultimate triumph of modern capitalism. It is a city of blinding neon lights, hyper-advanced technology, and cultural dominance that has swept across the globe. For the last 50 years, the world has looked at South Korea with envy. We called it the miracle on the Han River. We watched a nation rise from the absolute ashes of war to become a global titan, a star student of the industrial age. But if you look closer, past the towering headquarters of Samsung and the glamour of Gangnam, you will see something terrifying. The miracle is over. And it hasn't just stalled. It has mutated into something dangerous. You are not looking at a thriving superpower. You are looking at a dying civilization. For decades, economists referred to South Korea as the canary in the coal mine for the global economy. The idea was simple. Because Korea exports so much, if they get sick, the global economy catches a cold. But today, that canary is warning us of a different kind of disaster. It isn't warning us about a stock market crash. It is warning us about demographic collapse. The data is no longer just a red flag. It is a mathematical certainty. With a fertility rate that has crashed to a world record low of 0.72, South Korea is currently on a trajectory to mathematically disappear. We are witnessing a slow-motion national suicide. But here is the twist that no one talks about. This isn't a story of failure. It is a story of success. The system worked too well. The very forces that built this economic powerhouse, the obsession with efficiency, the brutal competition, the sacrifice of the individual for the collective, are now the very forces that are crushing its future. The engine that powered the miracle is now consuming the passengers. So how did one of the smartest, most hardworking nations on Earth design a system that is fundamentally incompatible with human life? And more importantly, why should you care? Because whether you are an investor in New York, a policymaker in Vietnam, or a young worker in Europe, South Korea is your future. They are just the first ones to get there. Today, we are going to dissect the anatomy of this collapse. We aren't just looking at charts. We are going to look at the one-dish economy, the real estate trap that created a generation of crypto gamblers, and the geopolitical straitjacket that is tightening every day. Welcome to the future. It's wealthy, it's advanced, and it is dying. To understand why this society is unraveling, we have to start with the most chilling number in modern economics. 0.72. That was South Korea's fertility rate in 2023. To put that into perspective, for a population to simply remain stable, just to keep the lights on, you need a rate of 2.1. South Korea isn't just missing that target. They are missing it by a margin that has never been seen in peacetime history. We often look at Japan as the cautionary tale of an aging society. But the truth is, Japan's fertility rate is roughly double that of South Korea's. Japan is aging gracefully compared to the cliff-edge drop that Seoul is facing. Demographers are now projecting that by 2070, the population could plummet from 51 million to just 37 million. Think about the economic violence of that statistic. That is the equivalent of an entire major city, millions of consumers, taxpayers, and innovators simply vanishing into thin air. By 2050, nearly 40% of the population will be over the age of 65. It is an inverted pyramid that is physically impossible to balance. But why? Why are young Koreans on a birth strike? The media often blames a change in culture or modern selfishness, but if you follow the money, you find the real culprit. It isn't a cultural shift. It is a financial trap. Young Koreans have a phrase for their reality. Hell Joseon. It's a sarcastic reference to an old feudal dynasty where your class was determined at birth and escape was impossible. Today, that class system isn't defined by bloodlines, but by real estate. In the United States, the average home costs about 6 times the average annual household income. That is already considered expensive by historical standards, but in Seoul, an average apartment costs nearly 15 times the average household income. Let that sink in. 15 years of income. Not disposable income, total income. This creates a situation where the basic social contract is broken. In a functioning economy, if you work hard, study hard, and get a job, you should be able to afford a roof over your head. In South Korea, that math no longer works. The result is a society drowning in red ink. South Korea has one of the highest household debt-to-GDP ratios in the world, over 100%. Families are borrowing astronomical amounts just to secure a small apartment or to pay for the educational arms race of private tutoring, hoping their children might be the lucky few to survive the system. Debt has become the heaviest burden of all. It acts like a massive tax on the future. When young couples look at that mountain of debt, they realize they have to make a choice. They can either afford a home or they can afford a child. They cannot afford both. And overwhelmingly, they are choosing survival. They call themselves the Sampo generation, the generation that has given up on three things: dating, marriage, and children. This isn't just an economic statistic. This is the sound of a generation giving up on the future because the present is too expensive to survive. When a generation realizes that the traditional social contract is broken, their behavior changes in radical ways. If you know that working a 9-to-5 job for 30 years will still leave you unable to afford a decent apartment, saving money stops making sense. Why save for a future that you can never afford? This brings us to the most overlooked aspect of South Korea's economic crisis, the Great Capital Divergence. Because the safe road is blocked, young Koreans have been forced onto the dangerous road. They have turned to high-risk, high-reward assets with an intensity that is unmatched anywhere else in the world. This is why South Korea has become one of the global capitals for cryptocurrency trading. You might have heard of the kimchi premium, a phenomenon where Bitcoin trades at a higher price in South Korea than the rest of the world because the local demand is so ferocious. But we need to look past the headlines. We need to understand the psychology behind this. For many young Koreans, buying Bitcoin, trading altcoins, or leveraging stock options isn't just investing. It is looked at as the last remaining ladder out of hell Joseon. It is the only mathematical way to bridge the gap between their stagnant wages and the sky-high cost of living. They aren't gambling because they are greedy. They are gambling because they are desperate. They are trying to compress 30 years of wealth, building into 3 years of lucky trades. But this desperate gamble has a devastating side effect on the real economy. Imagine an economy as a machine that runs on consumer spending. You need families buying clothes, going to restaurants, and taking vacations to keep the gears turning. But in South Korea, that disposable income is being sucked into a black hole. First, it is drained by debt repayments. Second, whatever is left is often thrown into speculative assets. When the crypto markets crash, as they often do, it doesn't just hurt individual portfolios. It wipes out the purchasing power of millions of young consumers instantly. We see a wealth effect in reverse. When their portfolios bleed, they stop spending. Shops close. Small businesses go bankrupt. The internal engine of the economy begins to seize up. This creates a vicious feedback loop. As the domestic economy weakens, jobs become even scarcer. And as jobs become scarcer, the desperation to win big in the casino of finance grows even stronger. It is a tragedy of incentives. The brightest minds of a generation are spending their energy analyzing charts and chasing meme coins rather than building businesses, starting families, or driving innovation in the real world. The financial system has inadvertently turned a nation of builders into a nation of speculators. So, we have established that the internal foundation of South Korea, its people and its capital, is eroding. But for a long time, the country had a shield. No matter how bad things got at home, they could always rely on one thing to keep the lights on: the export machine. South Korea is not a self-sustaining economy. It is a trading fortress. Nearly 40% of its entire GDP depends on selling goods to the outside world. But here lies the second fatal flaw. This fortress is built on a single pillar. That pillar is the semiconductor industry. Memory chips alone account for roughly 20% of South Korea's total exports. Companies like Samsung and SK Hynix are not just corporate giants. They are the oxygen supply for the entire nation. For decades, this specialization was a superpower, but today it has become a single point of failure. In 2023, we saw exactly what happens when that pillar shakes. As global demand for chips slowed down, South Korean exports didn't just dip, they crashed. They fell for 12 straight months, a streak of red ink we haven't seen since the 2008 global financial crisis. When you put all your national eggs in one basket, you are at the mercy of whoever holds that basket. And right now, that basket is being pulled apart by two opposing forces. On one side, you have the rise of the shark. For 30 years, China was South Korea's best customer. They bought Korean chips, cars, and displays insatiably. But those days are over. China is no longer content with being the factory of the world. They want to be the laboratory of the world. Chinese companies are aggressively climbing the tech ladder. They are now building their own electric vehicles, their own smartphones, and increasingly, their own chips. The country that used to fuel Korea's growth is now strangling its market share. On the other side, you have the geopolitical straitjacket. South Korea is stuck in the most dangerous geography on Earth. Economically, they rely on China, but militarily, they rely entirely on the United States for protection against North Korea. This is a nightmare scenario for any CEO. If Seoul gets too close to Washington, like when they installed the THAAD missile defense system, Beijing retaliates with economic boycotts that cost billions. If they get too close to Beijing, they risk losing the security umbrella of the U.S. The old playbook was simple: economy with China, security with America. But in a world where the U.S. and China are locked in a new Cold War, that playbook is burning. South Korea is being forced to choose sides, and no matter which side they pick, the economy bleeds. So, what is the final verdict? South Korea is facing a perfect storm that few nations have ever survived intact. They are fighting a war on four fronts simultaneously: a collapsing population, a suffocating debt crisis, a broken export engine, and a geopolitical stranglehold. These aren't just cracks in the pavement. They are deep structural fault lines that threaten to swallow the miracle on the Han River whole. But the most important part of this story isn't about Korea. It is about us. For developing nations like Vietnam, the warning signs flashing in Seoul are blindingly bright. We are seeing the exact same patterns emerging in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. We see real estate prices skyrocketing far beyond the reach of the average worker. We see a young generation beginning to feel the squeeze of the sandwich class, caught between caring for aging parents and the inability to afford children of their own. South Korea teaches us a brutal lesson. You cannot trade demographics for GDP forever. If a country allows its cost of living to crush the reproductive spirit of its youth, economic growth becomes meaningless because there will be no one left to inherit it. The risk for emerging markets is getting old before they truly get rich. For investors, the lesson is equally sharp. The Korean crisis is a masterclass in the dangers of concentration. Just as South Korea relied too heavily on chips, and its citizens relied too heavily on real estate, your portfolio is at risk if it lacks diversification. Whether it is a one-dish economy or a one-asset portfolio, when the tide turns, the collapse is swift and merciless. Contrast this with the United States. Despite its own mountain of problems, the U.S. has one massive advantage that Korea lacks: immigration. The ability to import youth and talent is the only thing keeping the American demographic pyramid from inverting like Korea's. It is a stark reminder that in the 21st century, the most valuable resource isn't oil or silicon. It is people. So, is this the end of South Korea? History tells us to never bet against them. This is a nation that rose from total destruction to global dominance in a single generation. Resilience is written into their DNA. But the playbook that got them here will not get them to the next level. They cannot manufacture their way out of a demographic collapse. They cannot export their way out of a debt crisis. They must do something much harder. They must stop obsessing over growth and start focusing on survival. Now I want to turn this over to you. Do you think South Korea can reinvent itself one more time? Or are we watching the first slow-motion collapse of a modern superpower? And do you see these same cracks forming in your own country? Let me know in the comments below. If you found value in this analysis, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more deep dives coming soon. Thanks for watching.